3:17 a.m., July 27, 1953. The ceasefire call might have stopped the shooting in Korea, but the real fight had already jumped to another battlefield entirely. $3.5 billion sounds like pocket change these days, but back then, in 1950s dollars, that's what the US quietly wired into Japan's economy as those Korean guns fell silent. Not charity, not goodwill, cold hard cash, and not just any cash. This was investment capital, strategic leverage, a way to turn a shattered empire into a Cold War spear aimed straight at Moscow and Beijing. Funny thing is, by the time those dollars hit Tokyo, Japan was still coughing up smoke from firebombing runs that turned entire neighborhoods into charcoal. The emperor had just thrown in the towel. The yen worth about as much as yesterday's newspaper. Factories, just so much scrap metal. The whole country was basically a zombie economy with a heartbeat. So why would Washington throw billions into what looked like a corpse? Because somewhere in the rubble of Seoul, some strategist made a gutsy call: flip Japan into an industrial juggernaut or watch the Reds gobble up the entire Pacific. Aerial shot of Seoul, 1953, streets choked with rubble, civilians scavenging bricks under flickering searchlights. The camera pulls back to reveal a U.S. Air Force C-47 dumping cargo, not food, not bandages, but stacks of blueprints. Stamped, classified. Eyes only. On screen, $3.5 billion, approximately $40 billion plus today, flashes crimson against black. A synth bass pulse hits like a sledgehammer. Here's where things get downright strange. Most folks think the Korean War was just a bloody stalemate that ended in a draw, but dig into the declassified archives and you'll find a single sentence that fundamentally changed the 20th century. Japan will serve as the workshop of the free world in Asia. Not Korea, not the Philippines, Japan. Why? Because the US had just watched China slip into Mao's hands in 1949. One communist domino after another. Now Korea was bleeding out. So Washington did something crazy. They repurposed wartime gear, tanks into bulldozers, jeeps into forklifts, and shipped them straight to Japan. They handed over military bases, they opened procurement deals, they flooded the yen market with dollars, and Japan, they didn't just rebuild, they exploded out of the gate like a marathon sprinter late to the race. Montage. 1954, a Tokyo steel mill, workers in grease-stained coveralls welding I-beams under a U.S. flag snapping in the wind. 1955, a front-page headline in the Japan Times: textile exports jump 300% fueled by American orders. 1956, a U.S. military cargo ship unloading Jeep engines labeled property of the U.S. government, now being rebuilt into civilian trucks. The music thins out to near silence. Only the faint whir of a reel-to-reel tape recorder lingers in the background. Declassified memos from the U.S. Far East Command show this wasn't just about economics, it was survival. One August 1950 memo put it in no uncertain terms: if Japan collapses into chaos, Soviet control over Asia becomes a done deal. So they bet the farm, not with bullets, not with bombs, but with cold, hard currency. A ton of it. By 1958, Japan's GDP had doubled. By 1964, they were hosting the Olympics, sleek, modern, barely recognizable from the ashes. In the US, they got a firewall, a production line, a silent ally in the fight against communism. But here's the kicker: that money didn't just rebuild Japan's economy. It shaped Japan's future, its corporations, its supply chains, its global reputation. By the time the Cold War fizzled out, Japan wasn't just a customer. They were a rival. So was this a lifeline or a takeover dressed up in dollar signs? Split screen, left side 1953 Tokyo slums, kids playing soccer in a field of rubble. Right side 1983 Tokyo skyline, glass skyscrapers clawing at the sky, fade to black. What we know for certain. The US pumped at least $3.5 billion, 1950s dollars, into Japan between 1950 and 1955. That's roughly $40 billion today. Source: ADSD Oral History Archive. These weren't handouts. They were calculated investments in industry, infrastructure, and supply chains tied to military needs. Source: EBSO Business Source Complete. By 1956, Japan's Ministry of International Trade and Industry, MITI, reported steel production up 400% directly linked to U.S. procurement contracts. Source: Wikipedia, post-war Japan. The game plan: keep Japan from becoming a Soviet puppet state and make it the workshop of the free world in Asia. Source: FAPA, Far East Strategic Review, 1951. The economic miracle: engineered, the blueprint, written in Washington, printed in Tokyo. So here's the question we can't ignore. When the US bankrolled Japan's economic rebirth with billions, who really walked away with the victory from the Korean War? Final shot: a single 1953 $100 bill pixelates, then reassembles into the modern Japanese flag. The synth bass delivers one last hit, deep, unsettled, hanging in the air like an unanswered question. Disclaimer: this video is for educational and historical analysis only. Investment choices, geopolitical moves, or moral judgments based on history should always be made with professional guidance. Credits roll over a grainy 1955 U.S. Senate hearing clip. Senator pounds the gavel so hard the mic pops. Title card slides in. The hearings were buried, the contracts. Not so much. Can you believe this started with a murmur in a Senate chamber so hushed even the history books kind of yawned through it? Back in 1955, Senator Paul Douglas laid into the defense secretary over something called wasteful overseas contracts. Source, ads.org. He demanded names, demanded numbers, demanded answers. Funny thing, those answers never saw the light of day. At least not where regular folks could grab M. Declassified ledger pops up on screen, pages flicker like a busted TV, red redactions pulsing like a bad heartbeat. Here's the wild part. The real show wasn't in those hearings. It was in rooms with closed doors. After the Korean War wrapped in '53, Uncle Sam had a dilemma. How do you keep a war machine humming when the bullets stop flying? The answer, outsource the whole damn thing, not to American factories, too pricey, not to Europe, too sluggish. They zeroed in on Japan, and not just any Japan, the one still sweeping up rubble from WWII. Archive footage, U.S. officers in khaki shorts stride through a Japanese factory, clipboards swinging like pendulums. One jabbering guy in sunglasses taps a lathe. Japanese workers just nod real calm. This wasn't charity. This was Operation Roll Up, a sneaky logistics empire where the Pentagon's entire supply chain ran through Japanese hands. Everything from fatigues to jeeps, from Spam in a can to spare fan belts. They called it offshore procurement. But let's be real, it was a hostage market. One Japan couldn't walk away from, no matter how hard they tried. Audio hiccups, crackling radio chatter, millions gone walkabout, costs keep spiraling. And here's the kicker, Japan had just been forbidden from building military gear by the US itself. Source, Wikipedia. So how do you rebuild a powerhouse when you can't even make a rifle? Easy, you make everything else. And who bought it? The same guys who just bombed the crap out of you. Data viz, Japan's GDP 1945-1960 rockets up in red. A jagged military spin line from the US cuts through it like a knife. Both graphs pulse in sync. From 1950 to 1960, Uncle Sam's military spending in Asia exploded by 4 times. Source, Wikipedia. And where'd nearly half that cash land? Japan. Factories that once wove silk now spun nylon tents. Looms that hummed with silk threads now wove camouflage. Shipyards that launched fishing boats now slid landing craft into the drink. By 1960, Japan's GDP was 3 times bigger than in '50. Source, Wikipedia. But here's the twist, this wasn't just about money. It was economic sabotage on steroids. Black and white memo flashes block Soviet bloc access to Japanese production capacity, no exceptions. The US wasn't just patching up Japan, they were handcuffing it. Every contract signed was a geopolitical ball and chain. Want US dollars. Then no trade with China, no deals with the USSR, no solo arms industry. Source, ads.org. In return, a blank check, and Japan signed it faster than a speeding bullet. Close up, a 1957 Pentagon memo. A scrawled note in the margin, this is how you win without firing a shot ever. So what you're staring at isn't just recovery, it's engineered supremacy. A country that lost a war became the assembly line for the next one, not by free will but by ironclad contract. And the US, they didn't just win, they got a lifetime customer, pitch black. The slow whir of an ancient reel-to-reel tape deck kicks in like a ghost clearing its throat. Grainy, flickering footage stutters to life. Tokyo in '58, a lit cigarette dangling in a smoky office, the city's scars barely healed from the war. Narrator. So let's pull back the curtain on this one. 1958. The Japanese Prime Minister's shaking hands with the US ambassador across some mahogany monstrosity of a boardroom. You can practically taste the cigar smoke and the Cold War chill in the air. The tape hisses like a snake, then coughs up a chunk of archive audio, some American diplomat's voice tight as a drum, barely peeking through the static. Archive audio, ambassador. Cross the Soviets once, and Japan's economy goes up in smoke. Narrator. Now they weren't haggling over silk scarves or soy sauce futures. Nope. They were haggling over something far uglier, control, like dangling Japan's economic lifeline over a bonfire. And here's the messed up part, Uncle Sam had the receipts to back it up. Snapped to a Davos panel in 2023. A Chinese delegate in a sharp suit leans in, mic swallowing half his words, Chinese official. Japan wasn't just a partner, it was a sleeper cell disguised as an ally. Narrator. Wait, what? Spreadsheet smacks onto the screen. Title, Project Sunrise Phase 2, numbers blur into focus. Columns scream things like country GDP goal, US military dole. Japan's row pulses neon green like a target in a sniper's scope. Narrator. This isn't some fever dream from a 4chan thread. This is real hacked drives, leaked spreadsheets, the kind of breadcrumbs that slither through the dark. Japan's GDP locked in at 8% growth year after year. US military cash poured straight into Tokyo's coffers like gasoline on a fire. Split screen, Japan's GDP chart in the 50s, climbing like a staircase, mirrors the US military aid graph next to it, both lines doing a happy dance in lockstep. Narrator. You want to call this aid? Nah, call it what it was, a financial katana. The US didn't just rebuild Japan, they engineered Japan into a Swiss Army knife for Cold War strategy, a Pacific watchdog, a Soviet roadblock. In Japan, they played along, no questions asked. The music slithers into something darker, like a heartbeat with a fever. Narrator. Here's where it gets ugly. Every yen Japan raked in. It wasn't just theirs to keep, nope, it was collateral, trade handcuffs, military real estate deals, political IOUs stacked to the ceiling. Sure, Japan boomed, but the fine print, they were renting their own economy. Black and white footage of 60s Tokyo protests, signs waving, faces twisted in rage. Enough, no more war economy. Cut to neon Tokyo today, skyscrapers clawing at the sky like steel trees. Narrator. Fast forward to now, the tabs come due, not in yen or dollars but in power. Japan's economic miracle, turns out it was a Trojan horse. And surprise, surprise, we're still inside the belly of the beast. Final text crawls onto the screen, stark and unblinking. The war didn't end. It just went underground. Source: ADSD Oral History, U.S.-Japan Economic Relations. Source: Wikipedia, Economic History of Japan. Source. So yeah, 2024 rolls around and Japan's still stuck in the same playbook it ran back in '52. Thing is, the world's moved on. Congress is yelling about unfair trade, China's sitting pretty as the second biggest economy, and Seoul's basically a tinderbox over US bases. Ever get that deja vu feeling? That debt paid off in '72. The weapon still aimed and ready. Every semiconductor that ships out isn't just silicon. It's like Japan's handing over another slice of its soul with every box. Experts spell it out straight up. Every time a semiconductor leaves port, Japan surrenders a little more control. Source: adst.org. And don't even get started. Back in the 50s, Japan built Toyotas like it was a national honor. Flash forward to today, chip royalty, power absolutely, trap, you bet it's real. The miracle was legit, so was the trap. So here's the kicker: who's actually footing the bill, and when does the reckoning finally hit?